Inside a quiet diner, a stooped elderly veteran stood against two police officers harassing a lone ex-Marine. His defiance turned the entire town against him, but what followed would leave them all speechless and forever changed. James Carter's gnarled hands were red and rough as he wiped down the worn countertop of Carter's diner for the third time that morning. The breakfast rush, if you could call four tired farmers and a pair of truckers a rush, had ended, and the old place had fallen silent again, save for the lazy squeak of the overhead fan struggling against the thick summer air. James glanced at the old cash register, mentally counting the few bills inside, his stomach knotting tighter with every calculation. It wasn't enough. Not for the overdue electric bill tucked inside his pocket, the one stamped in angry red ink, or for the endless medication costs for his wife's care. Just a few more months, he whispered under his breath, adjusting his faded Vietnam veteran cap. Repeating the same hollow promise he clung to since his retirement pay had stopped covering the bills. Outside, the main street lay deserted, the kind of stillness that spoke of jobs lost and hope packed away. James could feel the weight of every closed shop window, like another medal on his chest. First the factory shut down, then the hardware store. Now Carter's diner. His family's legacy after 30 years of military service was bleeding out little by little while he fought to keep it breathing. The bell over the door jingled, that familiar sound his father had loved before passing the place to him. James turned, claw still in hand, and the sight froze him mid-step. A man filled the doorway, tall and lean, his frame wrapped in a faded military jacket that had seen better years. His face was weathered, a thin scar running along his jawline, and his posture, despite obvious exhaustion, bore the unmistakable discipline of military training. But it was a Marine Corps emblem pin on his jacket that pulled the room taut. The few customers left stiffened. Mrs. Worthington, sitting near the window with her crossword puzzle, clutched her pearls in a little gasp. Joe Larkin, a farmer James had known since childhood, shifted uneasily, lowering his coffee mug with a sharp clink. The man moved toward the counter, boots thudding against the linoleum floor, the sound slow and deliberate. He picked the stool furthest from everyone else, his shoulders hunching slightly as if trying to make himself smaller, invisible. James's own time in Vietnam came back to him in a whisper. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of their story. His heart hammered against his ribs as he wiped his palms on his apron, grabbed a cloudy plastic menu, and filled a glass of water. "Welcome to Carter's," James said, forcing his voice into the same easy rhythm he offered every customer, even as tension prickled against his skin. "Today's special is chicken fried steak with mashed potatoes. Made it fresh this morning." The man looked up at him then, and James's breath caught. His eyes, pale blue, rimmed red like he hadn't slept in days, seemed at odds with the hard lines of his face. They weren't the eyes of a man looking for a fight. They were the eyes of a man losing one. "Coffee," he said, his voice low, rough like gravel, but there was a softness there too. "Black. Whatever's fastest from the kitchen. Been on the road since before sunup." As James poured coffee from the battered pot, he noticed a man's hands, large, callous, rough, but trembling slightly as he reached for the mug. A hospital bracelet peeked out from beneath his cuff. James's chest tightened. He had seen that look before, too many times in the VA hospital. Someone holding on by a thread. "Long ride ahead of you still?" James asked casually, setting the cup down. The man nodded slowly. "Heading back to Willow Creek Medical," he said, voice thick with exhaustion. "My daughter..." The words cracked, breaking apart like ice under strain. He dropped his gaze to the swirling black of his coffee. James swallowed past a lump rising in his throat. He didn't ask for more. He just smiled gently and said, "Toast and eggs coming right up. 6 minutes tops." As he turned to call the order into the kitchen, James caught the stares from across the room. Suspicious, disapproving, fearful. He knew exactly what this was going to cost him, but he also knew what was right. And James Carter had never been the type to back down from doing right. The bell above the door jingled again, sharper this time, slicing to the low hum of conversation like a blade. James didn't have to turn to know who had just walked in. He felt it in the sudden stiffening of the air, in the way Mrs. Worthington hunched lower over her coffee. Officer Dean Harper and Deputy Laura Miles had entered Carter's diner, both in full uniform, badges catching the sunlight pouring through the dusty windows. Dean swaggered toward the counter with the easy arrogance of a man who knew the town bent when he leaned, his boots tapping an uneven rhythm against the tile floor. His eyes locked immediately onto the Marine hunched over his coffee, and James saw the slow, ugly smile that crept across his face. Well, Dean said, voice loud enough to carry across the room. Don't see many ex-jarheads in Willow Creek, especially ones from out of town. The Marine didn't look up. He sipped his coffee, steadying his hands. James tightened his grip on the edge of the counter, feeling a flush rise to his weathered cheeks. Just grabbing some breakfast, officer, the man said quietly, his voice rough but respectful. Laura stood a step behind Dean, her posture stiff, her eyes darting uncomfortably between James and the Marine. Dean leaned an elbow on the counter, a deliberate invasion of space. Maybe we should check his ID, James. Make sure he's not one of those PTSD cases we got bulletins about. James's heart pounded. The man had done nothing. Nothing. But Dean was already circling like a vulture. The Marine's hand moved slowly, carefully reaching into his jacket pocket. But Dean's hand dropped instinctively to the holster on his hip. James stepped forward, his voice sharper than he intended. He's a paying customer. Dean, same as anyone else who walks through that door. Dean turned his head, his smirk widening. Same? That's Rich. He gestured at the emblem on the Marine's jacket. You know what those guys are like coming back. Unstable, dangerous. Half of them can't even hold down a job. The Marine finally looked up, his pale eyes locking onto Dean's, calm but unyielding. You don't know anything about me, he said, voice low. Dean barked a humorless laugh. I know enough, and I know better than to trust a man who might snap at any moment. James's hands were trembling now, but he stood his ground. His arthritic fingers curled into loose fists at his sides. He could feel every eye in the diner on him, some silently pleading with him not to make a scene, others waiting to see which way he would break. He thought of his own homecoming, decades ago. The sideways glances, the whispers, the doors that closed before he could enter. He straightened his stoop back as much as his old spine would allow. You don't have a right to harass someone just because you don't like what they represent, James said, his voice steady despite the knot of fear tightening in his chest. Dean straightened, his expression hardening. You're making a mistake, James, he said, his voice low and warning. This town doesn't take kindly to people siding with trouble. The Marine pushed his plate away, reaching for his wallet, but James placed a hand on the counter between them. Your money's no good here today, he said firmly. Breakfast is on me. The Marine blinked in surprise, a flash of something unreadable crossing his face. Something dangerously close to gratitude. Dean snorted in disgust, tossing a few crumpled bills onto the counter. Let's go, Laura, he barked, turning on his heel. Laura hesitated a beat longer, her gaze lingering on James with something almost like apology before following Dean out the door. The bell gave a sour jangle as it swung shut behind them. The diner fell into an uneasy silence. James busied himself cleaning the counter, ignoring the whispered conversations that sprang up like weeds behind him. The Marine finished his coffee in a few quick gulps, leaving a $20 bill tucked under his cup despite James's protests. He stood, adjusting his jacket. Name's Frank Morrison, he said simply. James gave him a small, genuine smile. James Carter. Safe travels, Mr. Morrison. Frank nodded once, a deep, solemn gesture, then turned and walked out into the blazing afternoon sun. James watched Frank go, a tight ache blooming in his chest. He had no illusions about how this would play out. Small towns had long memories for things they didn't like and short tempers for those who crossed unspoken lines, and he had just drawn a big, bold line in the sand. The afternoon wore on, slower than molasses, the few customers who trickled in offering tight smiles or none at all. When James finally flipped the open sign to close that evening, he sat heavily in one of the booths and dropped his face into his gnarled hands. He hadn't wanted a fight. He didn't need another enemy. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was the way Frank's hand trembled around that coffee mug, the glint of the hospital bracelet flashing like a silent cry for help. He remembered the countless times after Vietnam when strangers had turned away from him, the doors that closed, the jobs that vanished. And he knew he couldn't have done anything differently, even if it cost him everything. As James locked up for the night, he noticed something taped to the glass door. A crude piece of cardboard with angry red letters scrawled across it. And no veteran sympathy. No troublemakers. His stomach dropped. He ripped it down, crumpling it in his fist, but the message burned itself into his memory all the same. Trouble had found its way to Carter's diner, and James knew this was only the beginning. That night, long after the last light in the diner flickered out, James made his way through the quiet halls of Willow Creek Medical. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a pale wash over the linoleum floors, and the scent of antiseptic clung to the air like memory. He paused at room 214, his fingers brushing the edge of the doorframe before gently pushing it open. The room was dim save for the soft glow of the monitor beside the bed and the steady beat that marked each breath his wife still managed to draw. Eleanor Carter lay motionless, eyes closed, her once vibrant frame now fragile beneath the hospital blanket. James moved to the bedside, pulled a chair close, and sat slowly, reaching for his wife's hand. It felt warm but distant, like holding on to something already half-faded. "Hey, Ellie," he whispered, voice cracking as it caught in his throat. "It's me." His thumb gently stroked the back of her hand, a gesture she had done for him countless times when the nightmares came. "Rough day at the diner," he continued softly. I might have picked a fight with the sheriff," he added with a small, tired laugh. "Not on purpose, I swear, but you always said I needed to speak up when something's wrong." The next morning, James arrived at the diner before the sun had even cleared the tree line behind Willow Creek. He unlocked the front door, heart heavy, stomach tight, eyes still gritty from a night of restless sleep. The cardboard sign was gone. He had burned it in a trash barrel behind the building, watching it curl and blacken like the shame someone had hoped to pin on him. But the silence in town was louder than any insult. The usual breakfast crowd didn't show. Not Mrs. Worthington. Not the truckers. Not the two old men who played chess in the back booth every Thursday. By 9 a.m., the coffee had gone cold and untouched. By 10, James had begun wiping already clean counters just for something to do. At noon, he stood alone behind the register, staring at the near-empty tip jar and wondering how long he could keep this up before the lights flickered out for good. Then the bell rang. James looked up, expecting maybe a lost traveler or delivery mix-up, but instead, two strangers stepped inside. The man was in his 60s, tall, lean, weathered in the way men get from years of service. His jeans were faded, and his jacket bore the small silver pin of the Marines, understated but unmistakable. Beside him stood a woman, same age, silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She wore a simple blouse with an American flag pin, her eyes soft, her smile gentle. "James Carter?" the man asked. James nodded, unsure, tension creeping back into his spine. "I'm Roy Morrison. This is my wife Linda, Frank's brother." James's shoulders eased just slightly, and he stepped out from behind the counter. They shook hands, firm, warm, respectful. "Frank told us what happened," Linda said. "He wanted to come himself, but he's still at the hospital with Jesse." James's expression softened. "How is she?" Roy's face clouded just for a second. "Stage 4. They're trying something experimental. It's the last shot." James swallowed hard, his chest tightening. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "He said you were kind to him," Linda continued. "When no one else would be. Said you stood up to the police for him. That you didn't look at the uniform. You looked at the man." James gave a small shrug. Didn't seem like he needed a fight. Seemed like he needed a meal. Roy smiled faintly. Sometimes those are the same thing. James offered them coffee, and they accepted. He poured it slowly, trying not to let his hands shake. Something about their presence felt significant, like the hush before a summer storm. And when they finished their cups, Roy set his down and said, "We wanted to do something to say thank you, not with money, don't worry, with support." James tilted his head, puzzled. "Support?" Roy just smiled. "Give it a few minutes." And then it happened. At first, it was just a sound, a low rumble, distant, like thunder. Then more, louder, closer. James stepped to the window and felt his breath hitch. Down both ends of Main Street, the horizon shimmered with movement. Vehicles. Dozens. No, hundreds. One by one they appeared, cars, trucks, motorcycles, filling the street in front of Carter's diner. They came in waves, men and women, young and old. Every one of them wearing something that marked them as veterans. Caps, pins, patches, jackets with insignias from different branches and units. Some carried flags. Others walked with canes or prosthetic limbs. All of them came for the same reason. The noise grew deafening, then slowly subsided as engines were cut, doors opened, and veterans emerged. They moved in unison, with the disciplined coordination that never quite leaves a person after service. James stood frozen, watching as the parking lot overflowed and the sidewalk disappeared beneath a sea of veterans. He looked to Roy, stunned. "What is this?" he whispered. Linda smiled. "Frank told his unit about you. They told others. Word travels fast in our world. You treated one of us like a person. That means something." As the sun set on Willow Creek, Carter's diner buzzed with life like it hadn't in years. Veterans and townspeople mingled, sharing stories and laughter. Even Officer Dean had slipped in quietly, sitting at the counter with an awkward nod that said more than words could. James hung the Veterans Association honorary membership plaque. They presented him, right next to his own faded service photo. Two symbols side by side, past and future, struggle and hope, stitched together under one roof. What's a moment when you stood up for what's right? Share your story in the comments below. We respect every experience. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful, thought-provoking stories every day.